keep an eye in the waiting room and let people in? Thank you. All right, well, welcome and thank you for coming. Apologize for the short wait. So today is our first workshop in terms of specific skills that will help you be a more effective change agent. And if you are interested, and hopefully you are, to submit to the Changemaker Challenge. So, that is the wrong, we're out of order on the slides. Okay, no, I think this is the wrong version I'm sharing. Excuse me a second. So I am going to stop sharing for a moment and go here. That work? No? All right. So, sorry for how frequently we do this. I always have a technical difficulty. Okay, hopefully this works better. All right, so we do have a number of additional workshops coming up in the social impact series. For those of you who are students here at Temple, after break, January 17th, we have developing impactful and innovative solutions. On the 24th, we have financing for profits and nonprofits. The 31st of January, we have some expert mentoring, and then it is also our submission deadline for the Changemaker Challenge. And then on February 28th, we have our live pitch event where we will select the winners of the Changemaker Challenge competition. And if you scan that QR code, then you can get into the registration portal for all of these workshops. Okay, so here is the QR code for the submission portal for the Changemaker Challenge. Submissions do close on January 31st. However, it is open now. We already have some initial submissions, and I strongly would encourage everyone to get going, register in there if you intend to submit, and it gives you time. We have a ton of resources there that you can access, and we also have opportunities for you to see last year's Changemaker Challenge live event, and for you to start getting going on the different sections that you need to submit. So please scan that code and investigate and begin working on your submission. Okay, next, for those of you who were at our session 2 weeks ago from Phil Abundance with Pam Lawler and Lori Jones Brown, we kicked off a food drive with the goal of $750, which buys a lot of food for a lot of hungry people. And I was actually told that that goal might be a little bit aggressive, but believing in the beauty of the Temple community and surrounding communities, we went for the goal of $750, and I am thrilled to tell you we have overachieved our goal of $801, or we have achieved $801 in donations. So you might say, all right, Alan, why are you showing us this with a QR code asking us to submit? Well, or to donate. We have overachieved our goal, but within the Temple community, within the community surrounding Temple, and within the greater Philadelphia region, there are still way too many people who do not have the resources to get a healthy, nourishing meal, at least one per day. So yeah, we've reached an internal goal, but there's still a ton of people out there who are hungry and need our money and our support. So if you are able and willing, please donate. For those of you who helped us surpass our goal, thank you very much for your generosity and for your concern for others. Okay, so one other announcement, we have a very active Office of Sustainability here at Temple University, and they have actually received a grant to award up to $1,500 for student leaders to fund a project for sustainability. The deadline is November 30th at 11:59 p.m. But there is opportunity potentially to extend a little bit if you're interested in doing this. And please email Bryce over at the Sustainability Center, who is a great guy, very active, and you can scan this code to get into the portal to learn about the availability of these grants and to put in your proposal. All right. So now on with the show. So I would like to introduce our guest speaker, who is Nestor Torres. And before we talk about what he's doing now, I do want to say he told me that in his 9th and 10th grades of high school, he had the ability to participate in an entrepreneurship program we had here at Temple for high school students. It was a youth entrepreneurship program. And he has been amazingly successful as a business person in Fortune 500 firms. He has been extensively involved in community and social impact work. He won a very prestigious award for entrepreneurial excellence and community service. So the combination of both of those areas of passion. He is now founder and CEO of Maragan. I hope I didn't butcher that too much, Nestor. Maragan Consulting Group, who works with small businesses. He is also board chairman of the Greater Philadelphia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, also focused on small businesses and social enterprises. But perhaps most impressive about Nestor is he graduated with a BA in Business Administration, magna cum laude, which I believe, Nestor, is the top of the top, correct? Like the smartest.
Top 1%.
Top 1%?
Top 1%.
Okay, so that's pretty impressive. But what really impresses me about Nestor is he did this with a triple concentration in finance, risk management, and international business. So this is a true all-star Olympic type athlete since his youth. And we are very pleased to have Nestor here. We have been talking about ways we can collaborate between organizations in the future. And at this point, Nestor, the floor is yours. I will stop sharing and you are welcome to share your presentation.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Alan, for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to be able to participate in this forum. And for me, it's an honor to be able to share my experiences with the participants here this afternoon. And so first and foremost, I would like to welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being in this workshop, um, to listen to what I have to say. And a little bit of what Alan has said, I want to take you a little bit back about me. I'm a Philadelphia native as well. So I'm what I would consider to be a Philarican. I was born and raised in North Philadelphia, 7th and Lehigh. And so attending Temple University for me was great, being home and being in the area. But part of what has translated for me is taking that experience on the road and being able to combine it with my background and being able to try to really, really develop in a manner an ability to share what I would call acumen in a manner that's not necessarily from an educational standpoint, but from a practitioner's standpoint. And so today, what I would like to share with you is really part of some of the methodologies or mindset that I look through as a lens to be able to help and to be able to support and build capacity for organizations and individuals and small businesses within the landscape. One of the last things that I would say is that I'm a passionate entrepreneur and I'm passionate about the entrepreneurial spirit. And it's one of the things that I look at as today, where small business development is really what I would call the mechanism, especially in today's terms and economic terms, for the development and generation of wealth, and to a great degree, being able to utilize that for the transfer of wealth. And so when I look at that and then I put it against the backdrop of entrepreneurship, I look at entrepreneurship as being what I would call the apparatus. And the apparatus is really a lifelong vocation. It's not, you get it and it's done and then you move on. And so through that lens, I would like to share with you the content that I'll be talking about today. And one of the last things that I would say is I would like to have the presentation to be interactive. So feel free to ask questions and get in the chat and kind of shoot away your questions or comments, and we can have an open dialogue throughout the presentation. So by all means, feel free to chime in with any comments that you have. So first and foremost, I wanted to try to kind of lay out a bit of a table setting and start off today with a bit of a mindset, right? And establishing that mindset. And part of that was to ask a couple questions, a few questions. And the first one for me is, are you ready to take your vision and yourself to the next level? In whatever capacity that may be, in whatever state your vision right now may be. And have you been able to apply your strength to achieve a well thought out plan for social change? Did somebody say something? All right. So one of the things that I also would like to do is ask you, what does that all mean in the context of leveraging the result of money, time, processes, and people in measurable outcomes? And so we're going to get a little bit more into this arena of outcomes a bit more. But today, for me, is I would like to be able to serve as your sounding board, your confidential advisor, and support overall. And together, really build clarity around a vision that you may have and change and or refine your outcomes to take the next steps with that vision into really actionable and results that are able to generate outcomes. So I'm also going to try to challenge you and develop you in new and exciting ways to think of things a bit differently. But for me, that's really looking at how we realize your full potential and full ability and how we can do that together and unlock the potential of your future opportunity. start off overview of what we'll be covering today. So we're going to talk a little bit, and for me, it's kind of framing out entrepreneurship and starting there as a base, because I think that's really important for us to have common definition, if you will, and kind of look at things a bit in the same manner. And then look at results versus outcomes. And then we're going to dive into look at what is a result approach compared to a more outcome approach. And then we'll look at some scenarios and then measure and really look at how measure and impact play into, selecting a problem and that's worth solving for you. And then we're going to wrap things up. So can I get a couple folks to chime in and answer the question, what is an entrepreneur? Any takers? Any takers, or maybe put it in the chat? One person. No one. Oh, this is going to be an exciting group. I can feel it. I can feel it.
So someone who takes an idea, an original idea or an idea on their own to launch a business or a product.
Okay. All right. I'll take that. I'll take that. Anyone else? All right. So looking at the framework of being an entrepreneur, we can look at it as a person that's willing to take on risk. And I think that's really, really important to highlight and kind of underline. Risk is one of the most important factors in being an entrepreneur, including all the uncertainties that come with it. All right. And part of that as well is having the ability to create, organize, and manage resources, right? So part of the idea of looking at an entrepreneur is really as an individual that may not be resource rich, but is able to take resources that are identified in the landscape and do something with them, right? And that's including time, people, and money. And ultimately, that's for the advancement of an identified opportunity, right? And the opportunity could be that idea that I just heard, right? That's vetted out and turned into something that's a bit more vetted, right? To really look at the results of that for a benefit. And I use the word benefit here because benefit can be profit, but now we're living in a time where benefits actually also entrepreneurship relates to nonprofits, and nonprofits are not about profits, right? And so this idea of benefits is really more what I would call in line, because benefits can be profits, it could be results, it could be outcomes in different manners of how we look at it. And so with that, wanted to share a little bit more of 4 characteristics. You look at an entrepreneur and then looking at characteristics that start to embody what I would call the fundamentals of entrepreneurship. Part of that is adaptability, and especially in today's technological advancement arena, adaptability becomes one of the most crucial components of survival as an entrepreneur continues on with their venture, be it a profit or nonprofit. Continuous adaptability becomes that, if you will, you either keep moving or you stop and everything else around you moves and you pretty much do not move anymore. Systematic, I look at this as more in terms of really being in tune in a vocational sense for entrepreneurship. And there's a lot to learn, and there's always something to learn. As businesses are dynamic, businesses are changing, the economy is changing. So there's always something from a systematic approach that would need to be addressed so that you can continue on. Being purposeful is an area that today there's a lot of ideas, a lot of opportunities. Technology and other platforms have allowed the ability to be used in different ways. And so more today than ever, being purposeful about what you're doing with the resources that you have, because you may only have one chance, or that resource needs to be evolved and turned in a different manner to be able to generate more resources, is very, very important as a characteristic. Then we have tolerance. And tolerance I put up there in the same arena as risk. So tolerance and risk, from an entrepreneur perspective and looking at those key characteristics, patience and tolerance and risk all come together and culminate to be able to really, really be, high tolerance of pain, and pain, not necessarily in a physical way, but pain in a manner that allows you to be able to weather the storms that come about. And what I would tell you is that storms do brew and storms do come in business ventures. And those need to be approached level-headed, and they need to be approached at a level that will be another day. And today may not be that day that things have been won, but we have to look forward to the next day and what, or if possible, what we would do differently. Second to last is innovation, or being innovative. And so part of that innovative ability as a characteristics is really having that eye to start to look at things a bit differently and how you adapt, but look at the resources and apply them in a very different way, or apply them in connection with other things in a different way, right? And so today's marketplace and ecosystems are changing so rapidly that there's so many softwares and apps to be able to be used, and technology platforms and so on and so forth, that adjusting and utilizing them and embracing them in an innovative fashion to make your product or service or your idea and your selected problem in a solution in an innovative manner becomes very, very paramount. And then finally, I'm going to say tactical. And I use the word tactical selectively. And the reason why I use tactical selectively is because as entrepreneurs and looking at entrepreneurship as a characteristic from a tactical perspective, we need to analyze and we need to move in calculated manners, right? And planning is a quintessential fundamental in the process to be able to measure those resources and apply them, but apply them purposefully in a tactical, well thought out manner. So I have another question that I'm going to ask. So are you result or outcomes oriented? Can I get a couple comments? Any takers? Anyone? I just want to know, are you results or outcomes oriented, and why?
Could you, I'm new to this. What are the difference between the two terms? To me, they kind of mean the same thing.
All right. Nope.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's perfect. That is perfect. That is a perfect question. And so let's step a little bit back. And in the next slide, I'm going to start to detail out the difference between the two. And I'm glad that you asked that. And I'm sure there's probably several other folks that are asking that. And so although the words are used interchangeably at times, there is a difference. And there's a difference, especially as we start to look at broader picture within organizations, within the landscape, within the ecosystem, and how we choose problems to solve, and how we really focus and funnel resources for maximum impact, right? And so looking at it from that perspective, results become one thing and outcomes start to become something completely different. All right. And so I'm going to dive into what we're talking about. So What's results versus outcomes? What's the difference, right? And I think this is important, once again, to get us into a mindset as we continue to move forward. And part of this workshop of, identifying and selecting a problem worth solving, a social problem worth solving, part of this is starting to get into a mindset of thinking differently. And the first part of that thinking differently is us to recognize and separate results versus outcome. And so with that, we look at results as being the output of a sequence of input for a given time, right? When we look at outcomes, we look at the final impact of a series of actions over a period, right? And so when we look at these two and we start to pair them back, results, we look at results are primarily time bound, right? There's a plan, there's 3 months, right? You need to get X, right? Or it's for a year, right? So on and so forth. There's a formulation sometimes or a calculated approach. It requires a series of input. And so the results require these supportive aspects to get that result. And we're going to go through some examples. Results can change with actions, right? And so this becomes, think about an individual. Well, let's take the fill abundance example, right? So we've raised a little over $800, right? And so the result is the $800 to try to reach $1,000, right? And that can change based off of the actions, right? And the actions could there have, or we could put special initiatives that can say, hey, if you, well, they're matching contributions now. So every dollar that you give, someone else will give $3, or so that's an action. So just to put it in context, so you can change with action. It's something you do. It's short-lived, it's repeatable, and it's confined. All right. And so let's look at now and compare outcomes. So the outcomes for us, it happens over a longer period of time. They tend to be unknown and uncertain, right? And so the results are pretty defined, right? So $800, oh, we reached the goal of $1,000. Okay. Well, the outcomes are not necessarily that defined. It requires consistency for it to be molded. It's fixed and final once it's in, and there's consequence. It can be positive or negative. But the outcome also transcends. It actually transcends the result. The actual impact is broad and it's boundless. So let me open up the floor real quickly. The question that I had of kind of what's the difference? Do you have any question, or does this help to make that differentiation?
Yes, it helps. I think though we're going to be applying for something, to get funding, I'm assuming most want to hear about results, right? Those on the other end. So, or do we?
So that's a good question. That's a very, very good question.
Yeah, what should we should we just talk in results but really have outcomes in our mind?
Right.
Anyway.
So this is a really good point. And so we tend to always think about result, right? And we lose this outcome, right? And so I think this is a great idea to, I'm going to show some examples, but here, going back to your comment about, we visualizing outcomes and translating them to result is really a process, right? And so if we're applying for a grant, we need to have the structure, the organization, There's certain things that need to be in place. There's certain systems and processes that need to be followed, so on and so forth. And that's a good example. But the reality is that the outcome is that once we get the grant, it's actually going to be able to provide housing to 10,000 families, right? So, 10,000 families will no longer be homeless, for example. That's an outcome. Winning the grant is the result, right? So the result of what you did in your series of actions won you a grant. The actual outcome is the impact that was able to be translated with that result. Does that make sense?
Yes, beautifully. Thank you.
Awesome. So let's look at this. Let's dive a little bit deeper into this approach. So results approach. So the results approach really looks at it kind of from a 1 point and going up, right? So you're conceiving this opportunity, if you will. You put a plan together, you align it in the marketplace or in the ecosystem, and then you pretty much develop what that service may be, you implement it, and then you get the results, right? And the results could be, there's more individuals that are starting to use the service. That's great. So you go from 10 individuals to 15 individuals that are utilizing the service, so on and so forth. You go through, for example, and you're able to provide the possibility of a product in a manner that wasn't as efficiently distributed before, for example. But those are all results, right? You're increasing sales, or you're able to increase the ability to offer more service to a larger group of folks. On the flip side to that, let's look at the outcomes approach. The outcomes approach kind of looks at it a little bit differently. And I purposefully kind of twisted the graph the other way and said, look, outcomes approach really starts from a visualization of an issue or an opportunity or a possible concept that needs to be a bit more broader than what you're trying to conceive for a result-oriented approach. It needs to be strategized versus kind of planned, right? There needs to be a focus in the amount of resources to be able to be tailored out, to be able to really hone in on the maximum outcome. It needs to be analyzed and continued to be possible realigned if needed, or assured alignment, so that you can actually realize back that vision that's going to give you the maximum outcome within a community that you may be looking at providing temporary housing or drug addiction relief, right? Or being able to provide a service of technology access to kids at a recreation center that don't have technology access, for example. So that outcome now becomes impactful in the lives in the community that we are in within the existing landscape. So it becomes less about what's needed to get there, but more about the actual impact that those things will make. So here's a bit of a scenario overview as we continue on to look at scenarios for results versus outcomes. So from a result perspective, these examples, I have the outcomes that will come through, but I would like to get a take from the audience about what you think could be an outcome. So if I read out 75 new graduates from a small business capacity building program, what could be an outcome to that? Anyone?
Could be a number of new businesses that are in a community, or a number of people employed. Some
very, very good.
Capability.
Very, very good. Yes. Anyone else? One more taker.
More tax revenue to the city of Philadelphia.
Ah, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And so the outcomes here, an example is 3 new hires per business on average once graduated from the program. So let's look at the second one. Increase grant funding by 50% for a veterans workforce development program. What could be the outcome here?
Reduction in homelessness among veterans.
Yep, 100% job placement in gainful employment positions for previously unemployed vets. Or absolutely, as an outcome, it could be more housed vets because they can afford to get housing now, right? How about the sign up 100 new members for emergency preparedness training? What could be an outcome? Anyone?
Could be a much less severe impact to a community after some kind of an emergency.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So achieved a 20% reduction in accident deaths due to more prepared first responders, right? So are we seeing the trend?
Yes.
So the final one, awarded $4 million capital improvement grant for the construction of a community recreation center. What could be the outcome there, or some of the outcomes?
Less crime.
Yes, right. So realize the 98% woman and minority-owned business professional service contract participation, first and foremost, from an economic development perspective, and reduce neighborhood crime due to the availability of after-school youth programming. Absolutely. And so this is where, going back to the question that was previously asked, I think is important as we get into the mindset and we start looking at issues and social issues. The revenue that's needed to be able to be generated, to be able to support the cause, the mission, the value, that's really the outcome. And I think really thinking along those lines first, hey, what is the outcome that we really want? And how do we work backwards from there? Because the results we're going to have to achieve to get those outcomes. So as we look at how do we measure these things, and then how do we look at the impact of these things? And so I'm not here to be able to look at key performance indicators. I'm here to be able to look at a guide as a framework of the elements that are at play, and to be able to hopefully provide some level of guidance that you're able to take this on and really be able to select your social challenge and being able to be passionate about it and provide a framework to be able to be compelling to really make that change. And part of that in those elements, when we look at how do we measure these, it's really a culmination of entrepreneurship, results, and outcomes, right? So you pick your measure, whatever that measure may be, and you pick what your impact's going to be. And what I would say is that those aspects are all going to need to start off with an entrepreneur or a change agent. And that's you. And it's going to evolve to be able to exercise your core skills in entrepreneurship and how you develop that ability to be able to make more than if you were just the entrepreneur. And those are the results. And doubling those results, for lack of better words, based off of you being an entrepreneur and having that entrepreneurial spirit in entrepreneurship core, is able to then apply to those results that are able to then look at a multiplying factor of truly looking at the outcomes that are going to be generated. And all those things are really together. And that's the final bar that you see, the total. So it's really not one off. It's really how these pieces come together as a whole. So as we look at a social problem worth solving, what I would say is how an outcome mindset, having an outcome mindset in this process, you're able to look at and be able to work backwards and ask why you want to make an impact and envision what that means. Strategize on the outcome in order to provide a clearer picture of the long-term effects. Focus on your plan approach and ensure you're being intentional, efficient, effective, and compelling. Analyze your results for alignment or misaligned goals and values. And finally, realize your entrepreneurial potential to the fullest. And remember, as that advocate, as that change agent, be adaptive, systematic, tolerant, purposeful, innovative, and tactical. All right, that concludes that portion of the session. I'd like to open it up for questions, and I hope it was informative.
So thank you, Nestor. I do have a question.
Yes.
So that was a wonderful presentation. I love the results versus the outcomes. That explanation was very enlightening. My question for you is, can you give an example of a social impact business that worked, and then one that was maybe a good idea, but was not a sustainable business?
Yeah. So I will give you one example, and I will use myself if that's okay. And so Marigon Consulting Group started, and I'm a for-profit management consulting firm that specializes only in looking at small business capacity building and economic impact for underserved businesses and underserved markets. And part of what we do is that we bolt on to capacity building programs to be able to provide a business level acumen that may not be available otherwise to the small businesses, to allow them to succeed, to allow them to take advantage of the opportunities, create jobs, right? Be able to provide a service to the communities that they're in, and to have longevity and sustainability for ultimately wealth creation and wealth transfer. So that's one example, right? If you will. And I've been on the other end of that, where I've been involved with organizations, for example, childcare centers in Philadelphia, that struggled through being able to provide a most needed service within the landscape of providing early childcare education to children in Philadelphia. And there is tough business models, if you will. The mission and the purpose is there for the business owner to provide those seats, to be able to care for those children. The business model is one that's not aligned and makes it difficult, if you will. And that's the entrepreneurial aspect of really evaluating the opportunity and evaluating all the resources that are available. And it's an example right now. What I would tell you is the childcare industry is going through a very tough time at all levels. That requires government intervention, it requires subject matter experts, and still requires a level of small business development within that space. And was I able to answer your question?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
So Nestor, if I could add on to that, if I'm an entrepreneur who wants to serve the childcare needs of my community, where do I start on trying to figure out how to be able to initiate, launch, and then scale a successful childcare business?
Yeah. So what I would say is that right now, there are pockets in different segments within the childcare industry. And so there's a lot of consolidation that's going on. So first and foremost, what I say, if you can't come out of the gate big, it's going to be difficult. And coming out of the gate big means to be able to look at curriculum, to be able to look at the differentiating factors of the education and the level of service that's going to be provided, and being able to sustain that at 150 seats plus, right? In the ability to offer it at price points that make sense to sustain the business model with subsidies, or a model that really doesn't lean towards a subsidy model, but more of a private pay model, for lack of better words.
Reverend Johnson, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure.
So I'm trying to figure out a new model for homeless shelters, and transitional housing, because I can't rely on subsidies, because when they start being reduced, those clients who are housed will be kicked out if they can't provide income. So I'm trying to develop this with investors, but I know I have to develop a model where investment can be returned back to the investor in some form. How does one do this? And it has to be something new and unique. Because if we can do it, I pretty much guarantee you we can reduce homelessness quite a bit in every city if it's profitable.
Yeah. Well, when you figure that one out, you let me know. No.
That's why I'm here, brother. That's why I'm here.
So I think a couple of things that you mentioned are very, very important. And part of that is this subsidy model, right? And I think that when you start looking at business models, or venture models overall, for profit or nonprofit, and you start looking at what I would call the revenue model base, right? And the revenue model base becomes one of the critical factors in this, to be able to look at, hey, how do I diversify that revenue base? And diversifying that revenue base outside of capital investment. So if I look at capital investment, the capital investment components are really an infusion to be able to either start up, right, or operations to get you through a year. But ultimately, the model needs to sustain itself, right? And so first and foremost, those investors need to be like-minded in the vision and the goals that you're trying to do. And part of that is that social capital investment, and they're out there. They're more favorable, they're more tolerant, right, with returns. They may demand less. So doing that research. But the other part of that is also looking at, and this is where that is a problem worth solving. The innovative approach is being able to step away from subsidies and look at, is it private funding, right? Is it a translation of a way to start looking at a workforce development program with housing that eventually over a period of time transitions to the individual with income requirements over time, right? So you're working in a longevity and a transitional approach for funding transition, if you will. And so your subsidy can be a infusion for an individual to get started, but the other parameters and what I would call wraparound services now for the individual become very important for transitional longevity and sustainability for consistent housing.
Yep.
I didn't. I wasn't able to answer the question fully.
No, you did. You did, because the only the only model that I can actually see now that's apparent is through labor. You know, so if we can, so we have 5 billionaires in our city right now. So I'm not trying to do federal, state, or local. We have enough money there.
Mhm.
Now, each one of these billionaires have a facility and they need laborers. If
Mhm.
I somehow guarantee, let's say, a certain amount of labor at a certain cost, I think that they will see a return on their investment. But I think
Mhm.
I need a little bit more than just labor. So there's this new model coming out with churches building homeless shelters that the investor somehow gets to withdraw money from the property value. But I think that is kind of dangerous. What do you think about that? And I'm finished with my questioning. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, ventures start out so many different ways with sometimes the unique funding sources become, look, every small business starts in reality as bootstrap, and to primarily start with their own lines of credit, their own credit cards, right? Their family lending and so on and so forth. And so, you know, I think going through a deep dive and evaluating what works, doing a dual diligence of what does that mean, and what does that mean for the individuals, with private property, and when we're talking about social change and being change agents, everything's on the table. Everything is legal and moral. So
Thank you for saying that. Les, man, I appreciate your answers and your help.
no problem. Any other?
Anyone who's thinking of submitting the Changemaker Challenge, here's some free, very expert advising you could get. Take advantage of it.
So if nobody else goes, I'll go. So what makes for a good pitch for your idea? What elements actually make your idea come to life when others are judging it in a competition that you've seen?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. And I'm going to revert back to, really examining what you're thinking of envisioning. And as you look through how the strategic process of bringing it to fruition, it's going to be your pitch needs to be efficient, effective, and compelling, right? It needs to get to the point. What outcomes, what problem is it solving right from the gate, right? And what is so compelling about it that's going to be worthwhile investing in or worthwhile making sure that it attracts the attention that it needs? And those three components within themselves really, you don't need much, right? And just being efficient, effective, and compelling. Was I able to answer your question?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, we have another question. Are KPIs a true measure of outcomes where the whole picture is accounted for, even on a startup level?
Yeah. So here's what I would say. So KPIs, what I would consider to be key performance indicators. So key performance indicators primarily, I look at that as being kind of a dashboard approach to looking at how the business is running, right? And part of that, you can, have key performance indicators of how many service calls came in, how fast they were resolved, what were callbacks, how many people intake through a process, how many applications, resource utilization, like all those things, revenue per employee head, right? Like all these things that can be key performance indicators, but that's primarily to measure the efficiency and effectiveness of the operation and the apparatus, for lack of better words, to generate, right? And so the reality is, from a change agent perspective, the measure goes a bit beyond this key performance indicator to really measuring the impact. And the impact is what I look at as truly being, generated 250 jobs in the marketplace, was able to, contribute $250 million in tax revenue base, right? Was able to upskill X amount of employees, or a workforce development program that transitioned 50% base of unemployed or underemployed to a better employed situation, that garnered $1,000 or $12,000 or $20,000 in household income, for example. And so when I look at key performance indicators, are very important to be able to make sure that you're being effective in generating the results you need, so that the impact and the outcomes are being met.
Okay, so as a follow-up question, social impact takes time to affect. Okay. How do you know, and let's say we're trying to increase among formerly incarcerated individuals, increase employment by 30% within a year. In that first year, before we know the results, how do we check to be sure that we are making the progress that will lead to that end impact we see?
Yeah, and that's part of really that, what I would call that development phase of being able to look at your service, being able to say, hey, I'm starting with the outcome in mind. What am I going to need, right, to make sure this happens, right? And making sure you structure the organization in a manner that's able to do that, right? Because there's a lot of organizations out there, exactly as you mentioned, that boast about what they do, but it's hard pressed to really produce hard fact, right? And so the compelling part about the pitch question is really dialing it in and being able to say, hey, right, you're going to be effective because X, and you're able to truly understand your outcomes because this is how you're going to be able to do it. And if that process is turning that vision first into this process of strategizing and working through it. That's a really good question, Alan. And so it's kind of, and that's, I think that's a mode of working backwards than what we're used to.
Any other questions?
Yeah, this is Luis Vieira. I just wondering, in terms of corporations, as to not-for-profit versus for-profit in terms of social impact. If you have any thoughts on that.
So what I would say is that, I think there's a social impact for organizations across the board. Now, how do we measure those outcomes for those organizations differently and so on is, can be left up to debate. It can be left up to really considering, what does that is, what's that all about, right? And so, I think you need a balance, and I think, for-profits and nonprofits are a necessity. They're driven differently to a certain extent, and so that drive and vision becomes important because they both need to coexist in an ecosystem.
Very good. And just a comment to the gentleman who spoke earlier. He had a question in terms of addressing the homelessness in the area. Yeah. And another point that you made as well, Nestor, regarding the issue of child care, that this is a greater issue in terms of involving federal and state and all levels, including possibly private sector. I think that there's got to be a way to implement some degree of pressure or lobbying for tax credits for organizations or investors that are really making a contribution to address these topics. I think this will provide a basis for incentive to really take some of the pressure off of the startup organizations that are really trying to really have a massive social impact, but do not necessarily have a viable business model that could generate returns for investors. And I think that a tax credit mechanism could really address a lot of these things. And I mean, there's still a budget line item on the federal and state level, but I think that'd be something easier to digest because there is some return to the community and the state itself via tax revenues. Or just a thought.
That sounds like a social problem worth solving.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Anyone else? Okay, well, Nestor, we would like to thank you for your time, for your expertise. And we will surely be in touch with you and look forward to collaborating in the future much further than we have up to this point. And let me go back to screen sharing. Okay, so we do have at the end Nestor's contact information. I do want to make a plug for the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Institute within the Fox School of Business, where this program emanates with collaboration from across the university. And it's a great place to hang out. It's a one-stop source for resources for any entrepreneurial ideas and ventures and intrapreneurial ideas and ventures. And I urge you to check us out on the website and take advantage of all the resources we have to offer, including mentors like many of the people you have heard today. Next.
Really quickly, Alan, I just want to give everyone just thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to present and to spend this afternoon with me and listen to the workshop on selecting a social problem. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so again, if you'd like to attend, our next workshop is January 17th, Developing Impactful Innovative Solutions. And then on the 24th, Financing. Scan this QR code. You can register for everything. It takes you, I believe, to our website or the Startup Tree site. But either way, it'll provide a segue to all of our information. Again, Changemaker Challenge. You got a lot of great advice today for really how to make a difference and how to have your efforts translate into tangible benefits for people, for planet, for community. So again, please get involved, scan this QR code and learn all about submitting. So there's Nestor's contact information. And last but not least, for those up, are we missing the suitable points slide? Uh-oh. Emily, can you share the suitable points?
I can send an email tomorrow morning with the suitable points link for everyone.
Okay. Yep, so we will do that. And to everyone else, thank you for attending. Have a great last 2 weeks of school, and we will see you all after the New Year's.
Happy holidays.
Take care.
Bye.